about her project, Characterizing Roost Selection of Migrating Silver-haired Bats during Fall Stop.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm here to talk about the first chapter of my master's research over at LANO lab. So migration is a very interesting aspect about a lot of animals' life histories. And as some of us are familiar with, the hoary, red, and silver-haired bats were recently listed as endangered. And what these bats all have in common is that they're migratory species. We know very little about these migrations, which makes conservation planning a challenge. But what we do know is that this migration is annual, it's long distance, and they generally travel from north to south, so this latitudinal migration. During this migration, these bats fly considerable distances each night. They still have to stop somewhere once the sun starts to rise. They only remain in these stopover sites for very short periods of time, usually about 1 or 2 days before they move on and continue their journey. And this is because they use a strategy called torpor, which conserves a lot of energy in their body. So because they're able to use torpor to save energy during their migration, where they actually stop and roost might not matter as long as they can remain torpid. In the context of many roost selection studies, we tend to think of bats as fairly selective of particular conditions, but as I mentioned, they only remain at these sites for a short period of time, so where they roost may or may not matter. So I was interested in understanding are bats opportunistic or selective with roost choice during their fall migration at these stopover sites. So I investigated this in silver-haired bats, as they can be more reliably caught in large numbers compared to eastern red bats and hoary bats. And I conducted my work at Long Point, Ontario, which is a peninsula off the shore of Lake Erie. It's a very popular migration stopover site for a lot of other taxa, including bats. For those of you not familiar with Long Point, it is a mixed habitat of urban areas, so cottages, dunes, and beaches, as well as small woodlots. So I collected my data in fall of 2023 and 2024. I used mist nets to catch bats 3 hours before sunrise and leading up to sunrise. I would tag a bat with a modus tag and then release them. And then during the following day, I would track them to see where they went. So I was interested in understanding their selection on 2 different scales. So I was interested in understanding why did the bat choose this roost over other nearby options. So I would take measurements of the roost tree as well as the surrounding trees in a 5-meter radius for comparison. I was also interested in understanding why did the bat choose this tree and not other available habitat options on Long Point. So to assess this question, I generated 2 random points in a 100-meter radius from the roosting site and selected 2 random trees and measured the same characteristics on those as I did on roost trees, as well as their respective surrounding trees as well. So almost all, except for 2 bats, roosted in trees over the course of my study period, which is really interesting to see because there is so much available habitat that is not trees on Long Point. They could have roosted in attics, there were plenty of bat boxes around people's houses, but trees seem to be the roost of choice. So for my measurements, I conducted measuring tree species, level of decay, I looked at canopy cover, diameter, height, and several other characteristics of these trees that I then reflected on my random sample. So I would use radiant telemetry to track these bats to their tree, but once I got there, I wanted more than just confirmation from my antenna that the bat was actually there. So I would spend a lot of time in the field with my binoculars looking for these bats on these trees. I'm persistent, and some call it stubborn when looking for these guys. So sometimes I get amazing, perfect samples. So I call this a rest height bat. Can everybody see where the bat is on this tree? Yes, okay. actually spot the bat with some of the other trees that I found during this study period. Usually I look for black buzz and a white dot, which is this one that you tag. Can anybody see the bat in this picture? So it oftentimes gets a little bit more challenging as these bats would roost sometimes under the vines. So let's take a bit to look for the bat here. Hands up if you see it. Okay. Did you actually spot the bat? Because this is where it was. So you can see, kind of see it peeking out there, the white tag. Sometimes all you can really look for. Can anybody spot the bat in this picture? When the trees are absolutely covered in vines, which a lot of the trees on Long Point are, it gets very, very, very challenging. Every shadow between leaves can be the bat, and every spider web can be the antenna. So, can anybody spot the bat in this picture? No? There's our bat. Can you still not see it? There it is. So, we can see the black up there, and then the dot there is the radio tag. So, that one was quite a challenge, but it made it extra rewarding when I finally did find it. All right, last one, no vines, so fair game. Can anybody spot that in this roost? Give a bit. Now that we're all trained eyes, it should be easy. No hands? Two bats. So this is my favorite kind of roost tree where I track one tag and I get an extra data point per roost. So sometimes I did see more than one bat roosting on a tree, but they were never together. They were always kind of looked like they just happened to be on the same tree. If I was a bat, I would have noticed the other bat on the tree, so I doubt these guys coordinated their arrival there, but great for my data set. So over the course of my study, I tagged 46 bats and I found 44 roosts. Half of my roost trees were within 200 meters of the capture site. You see a nice map of Long Point there, the mixed habitat I was talking about. The other half were within 2 kilometers of the capture site, so they were all within pretty close range where they were caught. So on to some results. So I did look at tree species, and when we're looking at the trees on Long Point, the majority of them are Scots pine or cottonwood. And when we look at the trees that the bat selected, it was majority Scots pine or cottonwood. So it seems that it wasn't really a preference for these trees, it just happened to be proportionate to what was available. So I can reliably say like, there seems to be no preference for tree species for these bats at their stopover. Looking at decay status, so the majority of the trees on Long Point were in healthy condition and were alive. I measured decay status on a scale ranging from alive, which is green, to partially dying, dead, and decayed. And it looks like the bats are selecting for what is available in proportion to what would be the randomers and the surrounding trees. It doesn't seem that there is much of a preference for decay status at all, which can be kind of surprising when we think of other literature looking at silver-haired bat maternity colonies, for instance, where they do rely on these empty cavities. So looking at canopy cover, it was interesting to see if bats would select for sides of the tree where it was a clear canopy so that they could either get passive removal from sunlight or an easy exit once they leave in the dust. But as you can see, roost trees and random trees seem to have pretty much the same canopy cover, so it doesn't seem like bats are selecting for canopy cover either. I also looked at what direction of the tree the bat was roosting on. So if we look at this plot as kind of a bird's eye view on a tree, so we have the north side of the tree, south side, west side, and east side. I was interested in seeing whether they would roost mostly on one side, maybe they would avoid the west side because that's where the sun comes up, or they would want to stay on the south side where they get most sun cover during the day, but it seems that the bats don't really care what side of the tree they roost on either. So it looks like they don't care about a lot of things. Are there things that do matter? The answer is yes. Roosts seem to have twice as many surrounding trees as random trees on Long Point, so so these dense plots of trees. We can see here on the y-axis we have tree density, and then our random roost has significantly less than our roost trees, so they like these clusters of trees. Now, looking at height and diameter, so these two variables are very highly correlated. If a tree is taller, it's going to be wider. So I grouped them together using a principal component analysis to see if tree bigness or tree size was an indicator for increased probability of selection. So I did a binary logistic regression. So if we look at the graph on the right side here, at the top we have some points there. Those are bats that selected for trees. And at the bottom we have the trees that bats did not select for. So when we look at that in relation to our x-axis, so tree size, we can see that the larger the tree, the higher the probability a bat is going to choose it. So this is comparing roost to random trees on Long Point. When we zoom in a bit to those tree clusters I mentioned, so comparing roost to surrounding trees, the effect actually doubles. Tree size is a very, very strong indicator of bats selecting at trees. Bats are actually twice as likely to select a tree that is larger when comparing them to surrounding trees than random trees. So tree size seems to be a really good indicator of selection. So what does this mean? Roost's choice seems to be partially selective. Bats did select for roost trees. These trees were large. They roosted in areas with high tree density. And tree size seems to increase the probability of selection within this population. There seems to be no preference for species, decay, canopy cover, or roost direction. So when we think about these bats coming to a stopover site where they only really need to spend one day, it makes sense that some things matter more than others. They're probably flying way up. They're looking out, where can I roost for the day? They're seeing a cluster of trees. They're like, okay, probably find something there. And they're flying over there, and they're like, okay, what's the biggest thing we have here? It's going to be this one. Sounds like a good choice for me. So when we're thinking about roost selection, what does this mean for us? We are a group of people from a lot of different sectors. I've talked to a lot of you about silverhead bats and roost strategies. When we're thinking about the enlistment of horays, reds, and silvers as endangered, and what do we do now? Like, we don't have much information about their migration, but hey, we have a little bit more now about what kind of habitats they do rely on and what actually matters when they are looking for somewhere to stop. So with the context of this study, it's hard to kind of pick apart whether we can just say, okay, we only need to protect large trees, or we only need to protect tree clusters. Ecosystems work together and they function together to create habitat that is appropriate for the animals that use them. And so it's hard to kind of think that we can replace a whole plot of land with maybe a bat box, or leaving one big tree, or the biggest tree that is the most alive. So I think it's important to kind of take away from this holistic approach to habitat management and practices. With what we know, what can we do? We know that these whole areas interact together, and there's a lot going on, and we can't kind of pick and choose what matters. These bats certainly don't. So I'd love to chat with more people about what this means going forward, and I'm sure we'll be really excited to chat about it during our migratory bat workshop as well. So if I have time, I'd love to take some questions. Yeah, good question. So it was asking whether or not I included vine cover in my analysis as canopy cover or as a separate metric. I did record vine cover as a separate metric, so just kind of yes/no binary, whether there was vine cover on these trees or not. I'm still parsing through that data, but from what I can see in my data without statistical testing, and I don't think there is a specific preference for vine cover trees. It does become kind of a gray area because this roadside grapevine is invasive. So now what do we do when species that need to be protected rely on species that are invasive? But yeah, when kind of just by looking at my data without the stats from what I saw in the field, if a tree had vines on it, the bats would nestle into the vines. Like I even had bats that would roost exactly where only one leaf was touching the tree. They were like, I'm gonna go there. But where there was no vines on trees, they were just like slapped on the tree, like this is good enough. So, and I saw that pretty much as frequent as each other. So I don't think they were specifically looking for vines, but if they got to their cluster and they were like, oh, that big tree, I feel like I can go behind that leaf and fit there, I kind of saw that they would do that. But I'm interested to see if my data tells a different story. So thank you. Hi.
So you mentioned that they prefer larger trees. I'm just wondering if you looked at like the minimum TBH size for types of trees they or size of trees they prefer.
Yeah, so the question was whether I established a threshold, a minimum DPH size for the trees that I was measuring. And I did. I only considered a tree if it had a minimum of 10 DPH. Anything lower than that, I did not consider as a tree. And none of the bats I tracked roosted on something that was less than 10 DPH. So I feel like me and the bats kind of see what is a tree the same way, which works out. I did track one eastern red bat while I was in the field, and it did roost in the tiniest nothingness of a tree in the leaves up there, and that was a bit of a nightmare because it violated my DBH threshold. I was like, okay, I will take the DBH of everything here then, so I did that on the side, and I'm glad the bats I chose for my study respected my threshold.
You said that none of the trees were less than 10. What do you recall what the smallest TBH was?
Let's see if maybe you can see from my thoughts. Looks like very close. If I can remember, I think 15. So we were getting there, but it was like the odd, like nothingness of a tree. Like I remember it was one bat that we tracked to this like broken tree that was leaning on another tree, and it was like very small, but just made the threshold, and me and my field tech were very happy. But I think it was just the one off that was almost close to the threshold. Yeah.
Following on this question there about some of the other metrics, don't remember what species and trees you said were in the area, but I was thinking they might be different species, but they might all have similar like bark type. And I wasn't sure if that was something to consider, because I know that like it's really deep, they like the little bit like nestle into the crevices, and so yeah, I don't know a lot about what kind of bark some of those trees look like, but they might be really different.
No, yeah. So the question was whether I looked at different types of bark on these tree species that were measured. So as I mentioned, like it was majority Scots pine, majority cottonwood. I see them as like very different kinds of barks. Where Scots pine is like very peely and sometimes can have like these little crevices that come up when the bark starts to peel off a little bit. Whereas cottonwood is like really hardy. It looks like reminds me of like elephant skin, like super wrinkly. It has these like deep grooves in it. So they do look quite different. On Scots pine, I didn't see any bats like go under the bark. So it was just kind of like on the surface, and that was the same for the cottonwoods, although they have different types of bark. It seems that surface was good enough for these bats, so I treated them the same way. Right.
So I was just following up on my question earlier. So you said they preferred larger trees. I just wanted to know what your definition of a larger tree was. Like what was the TBH for a larger tree?
Yeah, so the question is, what do I consider a larger tree? I think, I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, like looking at combined height and diameter. So I did a principal component analysis to see if I could basically combine height and diameter into one variable and call that tree bigness. So when I think about like large trees, it's kind of a combination of height and diameter in, I guess, comparison to the other trees I sampled that were, I guess, if we look at the two plots on the left side, height seems to not differ too much between Roost and random trees on one point, but DBH tells a different story. There are definitely smaller DBH trees than and larger DBH trees. So looking at tree bigness, combining these together shows us that the tree size is a good indication of probability being chosen, but height isn't playing as much of a part in the story as diameter. Like larger trees seem to be wider more than they are taller, but I grouped them together for the analysis.